Hey everyone, welcome back to ONYX Pages. I am Jerry and I was born in Canada. So let's talk a little bit about that, and let's also talk about the fact that I am one of the hosts of the Canadian readEHthon. So for those of you who aren't aware, the Canadian readEHthon is a readEHthon that was created by the lovely Kayla of Books and Lala, and I am going to be joining the roster of hosts for this year. So I'm going to tell you who all the hosts are. I hope that you will check out their channels and look at their content and subscribe if their content is interesting to you. So the hosts for this year are obviously Kayla of Books and Lala, me from ONYX Pages, Paige from Minimal Bookie, Jill from The Book Bully, Natasha from My Reading is Odd, which is the most intriguing YouTube channel name I've heard in a little while, Janani from This Story Ain't Over, 'cause it's not, and Zoe from Zoe's All Booked, and finally Rue from Rue's Reading Corner. Today is July 1st, and it is officially Canada Day. I don't celebrate Canada Day, which I'll talk about in a second, but I know that folks do. And we decided that we were going to launch the readEHthon on Canada Day. We were originally going to host the readEHthon during this week and announce it earlier in the year, but at the time that we were talking about the hosting and all of the logistics, that's when Breonna Taylor and George Floyd were murdered, and many others, and it just wasn't the right time, certainly for me, to be thinking about a Canadian readEHthon. It was time to really hold my Black people close, so I am happy that we decided to postpone the readEHthon to April 3rd to April 9th and announce it today on July 1st. So what I'm going to do is a couple things. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the readEHthon. I'm going to explain the prompts. I'm also going to just randomly take you through a selection of Canadian books that I have in my possession. And then I think we'll be done. So let's first start with what the Canadian readEHthon is, or just the readEHthon. So you'll note that instead of calling it the readEHthon, we call it the readEHthon, which has the letters EH in the title. And that's because apparently a lot of Canadians say A. You know what I mean? And some people do say A lot, and I think it depends on where you're from, what part of Canada you're from, and some people don't. I'm not necessarily somebody who says A lot, but it does creep into the things that I say, and when people point it out, I feel really sheepish because I used to pride myself on not being somebody who said A lot. In fact, the Canadianism that I engage in more often than not is saying sorry all the time. Although when I say sorry, it's not always because I'm apologetic. Often it's because I haven't heard what you've said. So sorry for me means pardon or come again, which is more of a Trini thing. But anyway, I sometimes over apologize. Sorry. Okay, so the Canadian readEHthon is really about reading Canadian books. So books by Canadian authors and books that have been published by Canadian publishing houses. The whole point is to really get your mind thinking a little bit north for those of you who are North American, and thinking about Canada for those of you who are outside of the North American context. So I'm going to take you through the prompts. There are 16 prompts, and there is a bingo board, which I'm going to put here. Also, this is one of my favorite backgrounds, and I only use it when I'm filming on my bed and I don't want you to know, which you now know. But yes, I'm going to put it like over here somewhere. So this is where the bingo board is going to go. And there are 16 prompts. So I'm going to take you through the prompts, and for some of them I'll provide explanations for why we chose those prompts. You will notice a theme. A book by an Indigenous author. So one of the reasons that I don't celebrate Canada Day is because for me, it's a celebration of colonization and genocide. And that's not really something that I'm gonna jump up about. So I don't celebrate it for what it's meant to be, which is a celebration of this place called Canada. Rather, it's an opportunity for me to think about the formation of the nation state that we call Canada on top of Turtle Island, and to think about all the communities of color who make up the Canadian identity and what that means for us to be on this land at this particular time. So I live in Toronto. And Toronto is the ancestral home of many Indigenous communities, ancestrally, but also presently today. And I myself have committed to being on a path of learning about the Indigenous heritage of Toronto, but also the Indigenous heritage of Canada as a nation state. So I don't celebrate Canada Day, but I appreciate it because it provides me an opportunity to think more deeply about what it means to be here. I'm first generation Canadian. My parents were born in Trinidad. So the prompt, a book by an Indigenous author, is really great for me because it allows me to really focus my reading and thinking on what it means to be the child of an immigrant on Indigenous land. And also it provides me an opportunity to learn more about Indigenous cultures in Canada. Maybe what I'll do is, as I go through the prompts, I'll give you some examples of things you could read. So for a book by an Indigenous author, this is a book that I got recently that I'm reading slowly, and it's amazing. So I have recently gotten into graphic novels, and this is This Place, 150 Years Retold. So Canada celebrated its 150th anniversary of colonization and genocide. And this is really interesting because this is a collection of stories. All of them are graphically rendered, and all of them are written by Indigenous authors. So there are stories by Aboriginal authors, by Métis authors, by Inuit authors, and it's really cool because they're reclaimings of Canadian history. So I've read about 4 of the stories in this collection, and it's cool because some of the stories involve historical figures that I learned about in school, but the stories are told from the perspective of Indigenous peoples. There are a lot of mistruths that are told about how French and British communities came to Canada and how they interacted with Indigenous communities, and these stories provide the actual truth as to what happened. And in addition to that, they're also funny and interesting and moving and really beautifully rendered. So this is This Place. The foreword was written by Elliott, and there are a number of different authors. I think there are about 16. The art is really, really, really beautiful, and the stories are wonderful. I thought there was somebody. Okay. The second is a story about a loving relationship. So we wanted to be really careful about framing loving relationships as romances only. Loving relationships can be a relationship of love between 2 or more people. It can be a relationship of love between a person and the land. It can be a relationship of love between a person and an animal. Like, there's a whole bunch of different kinds of loving relationships that can form the center of your Canadian read. So please think creatively when you decide to fulfill this prompt. The story that I want to read for a loving relationship is one that I would have liked to read a long time ago because I actually requested a galley, which is, so in the US you call free copy, like review copies, you call them ARCs. In Canada, we call them galleys. So this was a galley copy of An Ocean of Minutes. And this was a debut novel by Thea Lim. I'm just going to read the back because it's quite compelling. It also fits a couple of different prompts. America is in the grip of of a deadly flu pandemic. When Frank catches the virus, his girlfriend Polly will do whatever it takes to save him, even if it means risking everything. She agrees to a radical plan. Time travel has been invented. If she signs up for a one-way trip into the future to work as a bonded laborer, the company will pay for the life-saving treatment that Frank needs. Polly promises to meet Frank again in Galveston, Texas, where she will arrive in 12 years. But when Polly is rerouted an extra 5 years into the future, Frank is nowhere to be found. Alone in a changed and divided America with no status and no money, Polly must navigate a terrifying new world to find Frank, to discover if he is alive, and to see if their love has endured. So this was written by Thea Lim. Thea Lim is a Canadian author, and it was published, it actually won by Viking Canada, and this actually won a prize. So it fits a number of different prompts. Anyway, this is An Ocean of Minutes by Thea Lim. The next prompt is a book from a Canadian publisher. So a number of the books that I'm going to be talking to you about today have been published in Canada. I believe that Highwater Press. So that is the this one is a Canadian publisher, and there are a bunch more. But anyway, it's pretty self-explanatory. Think about who's publishing the books that you're reading, and if you have a book on your shelf that was published by a Canadian publisher, then obviously that would fit this prompt. Nature on the cover. So apparently a lot of books have nature on the cover, but this might have nature on the cover. Yes, so this is, but I wanted to talk, okay, I'll talk about this now. So this is At the Full and Change of the Moon. This is written by Dionne Brant, who is an award-winning novelist and also poet in Canada. She is from the Caribbean and has won a ton of awards. So if you're interested in Black Canadian writers who write beautiful, just lyrical stories about things like immigration or just the experience, just beautiful prose, Dionne Brant is definitely somebody who you want to look at. She is also queer, and so that makes me happy. I haven't actually read anything of hers. I tried to start reading this book maybe about 15 years ago, and then I put it down because I wasn't as avid a reader then as I am now. So this is At the Full and Change of the Moon. A magnificent, shocking act of defiance by a woman in the 19th century begins this beautiful novel by an award-winning writer, a richly imagined saga spanning 6 generations. In 1824, on the island of Trinidad, Marie Ursule, queen of a secret society of militant slaves called the Sans-Peur Regiment, plots a mass suicide, a quiet, passionate act of revolt. It is also the beginning of a new world because Marie Ursule cannot bring herself to kill her small daughter Bola, whom she smuggles away from the estate in the early dawn light. Bola's children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren will spill out across the world to America, to Canada, to Europe. Their lives will be haunted and vindicated by Marie Ursule's dreams and her passion as the world passes through 2 wars and into the confusion, estrangement, and violence of the late 20th century. In sensuous prose, At the Full and Change of the Moon tells through the intimately interconnected stories of Marie Ursule's descendants a history of dispossession, and the heartbreaking intensity and wisdom with which we are drawn into the lives and passions of each of them confirms Dionne Brant in the front rank of the world's novelists. So that is Dionne Brant. So that does have nature on the cover, but of course, just, find a book with nature on the cover. The next prompt is set in a province or territory you haven't been to. I've been to most of the provinces and territories in Canada. The ones I haven't been to the Yukon, I haven't been to Nunavut, and I haven't been to the Northwest Territories. But at this point, I have been to every province in Canada except for New Brunswick and Newfoundland. and that's it. Otherwise, I've been to all of the other provinces, and I'm proud to say that. So I would like to have the opportunity to travel to the territories and also to the provinces that I haven't been to as yet. So that's probably not a prompt that I'm going to try, but that's another of the prompts. The next prompt is Black Canadian history, and I have a few suggestions for that. We decided that a number of the prompts should deal with Black people in Canada, given the fact that Black communities around the world and allies to Black community, or accomplices and comrades for Black communities around the world, are raising their voices about anti-Black racism. So a couple of the prompts deal with Black communities. So for Black Canadian history, I would recommend essays. So this is called We're Rooted Here and They Can't Pull Us Up. Essays in African Canadian Women's History. And this was coordinated by Peggy Bristow, who is a scholar. She is a Barbadian Canadian. She was born in Barbados and is living here in Canada. And she coordinated this collection of essays written by Black women that include Dionne Brant, who I spoke of earlier, Linda Carty, Afua Cooper, Sylvia Hamilton, Adrienne Shad, and a number of other individuals. So this is out of print, but it is a wonderful resource. So actually, it's out of print, but you can probably still get copies if you look hard enough. But this was published by the University of Toronto Press. And this whole idea of, like, you can see a bunch of Black women on the cover, we're rooted here and you can't pull us up. That is often the kind of sentiment that Black communities might feel when they are immigrant communities or communities that have been a part of the historical and political and social landscape of a country, but are still considered to be newcomers all the time. So it's a powerful title, and that is a recommendation for you. A debut author. So the debut author, that's self-explanatory as a prompt, but I gave you the example of An Ocean of Minutes. So this was Thea Lim's first published novel. An LGBTQIA plus queer story. I'm going to recommend this, but I've already read it. That is Shout Out. So Shout Out is a collection of graphic stories, all written by people who identify as the various permutations of queer. It was published by Toronto Comics, and the foreword was written by Nalo Hopkinson, who is also queer and who lived in Toronto for a significant part of her life. But I read this for the Queer Lit readathon, and it was sweet and soft and beautiful and fun, and it's definitely a queer read that you will enjoy. So I recommend that to you. The next prompt is anti-racism literature. This can be any kind of literature that looks at, explains race, and explores how to eradicate race. So as you know, I am a lawyer, and so while I have many books that would fulfill this prompt, I've got here color-coded A Legal History of Racism in Canada, because it's here. A lot of people talk about Canadians as nice, and I mean, it's not true that Canadians are nicer than others. That's not my experience. That's not actually true. I think that there is a cultural expectation that you will appear polite and unassuming, but hate is hate, and it's everywhere. I mean, in Toronto, we are dealing with anti-Black, white supremacist graffiti on our public transit systems. So it's everywhere, right? There are parts of our city and suburbs and small communities across Canada, but I'm in the province of Ontario, where white supremacist groups are actively organizing and have never stopped organizing. So it's a fallacy and a privilege, I think, to focus on the fiction of Canada being full of nice people who are non-confrontational and who say sorry a lot, except that part might be true. So Color Coded is a legal history of racism in Canada from 1900 to 1950. This was written by Constance Backhouse. It is a very rich read. You probably want to take it in segments, but it is a wonderful read. I like reading legal histories because it is amazing to see how much the law can enable and how much it can obstruct if it's used appropriately. So this is a book that people who take race or anti-Black racism in law schools will end up reading or using as a resource. All right, sneezing. Okay, the next is a Canadian children's book, and I am particularly proud to talk about this book because this book was written by a friend of mine. We have been friends for decades. We've been friends for decades, and her name is Nadia Hahn, and she has written many books. Like, I think she's over 13 now, I think, but I could be wrong, but she's written many, and this is Malika's Costume. And so it's written by Nadia Hahn, and I love this book. I love the art in this book. I love the story of this book. I identify with this book because it tells a story of a little girl who is, participating in carnival and what it means to get a costume from, sent to her, and her feelings about that, and just a lot of themes about what it means to be part of like a transnational community where you have a grandparent, maybe a parent or aunts and uncles in the Caribbean, but you're growing up in Canada and you're participating in like a Canadian thing, whether it's Caravana or Carnival, and you're connected to, being back home. Like, it brings up those themes for me. I'm not sure that those were the intended ones, but that's what it brought up for me. So it also has a peacock on the cover, and if you know me, you know that I love my peacocks. So that's Nadia Hahn's. So Malika, right now, there's a trilogy of Malika's books, and I think there are going to be many, many Malika's books to come. So definitely check out Nadia Hahn and check out the books that she's written. So that would be a Canadian children's book. The next prompt is a book that's set in a province or territory you have been to, which will be easier for me, but I'm not going to go into that because it's a fairly easy prompt to get to. The next prompt is an immigrant or refugee story. So I gave you one immigrant story, which is An Ocean of Minutes. One is a Canadian Book Award nominee. So Dion Brandt is a Book Award nominee. Or a book award winner, and there are a number of different award winners that I'll be talking about. So just you can take a look at Canadian Book Awards and then find lists of books to consider. The next is a book with red on the cover, so find a book with red on the cover. The next prompt is a book by a Black author, so I've given you a few. A few more would be, actually, I'm going to hold that, is A Wish After Midnight by Zeta Elliott. So this is a time travel story with a Black female protagonist. Jenna is a 15-year-old girl who wants out of her tough Brooklyn neighborhood, but she gets more than she bargained for when a wish gone awry transports her back in time. Facing the perilous realities of Civil War-era Brooklyn, Jenna must use all her wits to survive. So this is said to be in the tradition of Octavia Butler's Kindred. Zeta Elliott is a Canadian author. This is, I believe that this may have been self-published. But she moved to the US because a lot of Black Canadian authors have not gotten a lot of love from Canadian lit and have moved to the US and either self-published or published with American publishers. But A Wish After Midnight would fit the prompt for a book by a Black author. And then finally, something that is not a novel. And I have a couple of examples of that. So the first would be another Zeta Elliott title, and this is Say Her Name. This is a book of poems to empower. They're all about Black women, and Say Her Name is the hashtag, but also the movement, encouraging us to remember those Black women who lost their lives to police brutality. There's also this short story collection called Toronto 2033, and this is speculative fiction that imagines Toronto in the year 2033. There are Black writers, queer writers, writers with disabilities, Indigenous writers, so it's a great collection, and I am looking forward to that. This is also not a novel, it is a report. This is the report of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. This is the summary. It's a 400-page document, and the subtitle is Honoring the Truth, Reconciling the Future. Anybody who's interested in learning about the experiences of Indigenous peoples in Canada should really think about reading the report as a starting point for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I'm going to read the back because I don't want to summarize it because I'm still learning. This is the final report of Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission and its 6-year investigation of the residential school system for Aboriginal youth. This summary volume includes the history of residential schools, the legacy of that school system, and the full text of the Commission's 94 recommendations. This report lays bare a part of Canada's history that until recently was little known to most non-Aboriginal Canadians. The Commission describes the logic of the colonization of Canada's territories and why and how policy and practice developed to put an end to the existence of distinct societies of Aboriginal peoples. Using excerpts from the powerful testimony of survivors, this report documents how the residential school system forced children into institutions where they were forbidden to speak their language, required to discard their clothing in favor of institutional wear, given inadequate food, housed in inferior and fire-prone buildings, required to work when they should have been learning, and subjected to the emotional, psychological, and often physical and sexual abuse. More than 30,000 survivors have been compensated financially by the Government of Canada for their experiences in residential schools, but the legacy is ongoing. This report explains how the residential school experience is connected to personal, family, and social issues today, like drug and alcohol abuse and high rates of suicide. The commissioners document the drastic decline in the presence of Aboriginal languages, even as survivors and others work to maintain their distinctive culture, traditions, and governance. The commission concluded that the historical experience of residential schools constituted an act of cultural genocide by Canadian government authorities. The report offers 94 recommendations for governments, churches, public institutions, and non-Aboriginal Canadians as a path to move from apology to true reconciliation that can be embraced by all Canadians. So I've been meaning to read this report for a very long time, and it's important. So this would fulfill the prompt of read something that is not a novel, and this is not fiction, it is fact. All right, so there are a few other titles that I want to suggest to you as well. These are also books that I want to read. The first is The Chaos by Nalo Hopkinson. It is her only young adult novel, and it is also set in, is it Toronto? Yes, I mean, it feels like, yeah, it is downtown Toronto. So something apocalyptic and magical happens in downtown Toronto, and this young woman has to figure out how to manage in all of it. She is a lovely Black child, really creative and saucy, and gives very few fucks, and she's wonderful. So this is The Chaos by Nalo Hopkinson. This is also a trilogy. So book one is so this is the Effigies series by Sarah Raleigh. So book one is Fate of Flames. Book two is Siege of Shadows. And book three is Legacy of Light. And so Sarah Raleigh is a Black woman who lives in Southern Ontario, and this is young adult fantasy. So I'm just going to read the synopsis for book number one. Phantoms, massive beasts of nightmare, began terrorizing the world. At the same time, four girls, the Effigies, appeared, each with the unique power to control a classical element. Since then, they have protected the world from the phantoms. At the death of one effigy, another is chosen, pulled from her normal life into the never-ending battle. When Maya unexpectedly becomes the next fire effigy, she resists her new calling. A quiet girl with few friends and almost no family, she was much happier to admire the effigies from afar. Never did she imagine having to master her ability to control fire, to protect innocent citizens from the phantoms, or to try bringing together the other three effigies. But with the arrival of the mysterious Saul, a man who seems to be able to control the phantoms using the same cosmic power previously only granted to four girls at a time, Maya and the other effigies must learn to work together in a world where their celebrity is more important than their heroism. But the secrets Saul has and the power he possesses might be more than even they can handle. So there's that. And I have three more books to tell you about. This is The Marrow of Thieves. It is an award-winning. I've been told that this is young adult. I didn't realize that it was, but the author is Métis. Yeah. So this is Cherie Dimaline as the author. In a world nearly destroyed by global warming, the indigenous people of North America are being hunted for their bone marrow, which carries the key to recovering something the rest of the population has lost, the ability to dream. Frenchie and his companions, struggling to survive, don't yet know that one of them holds the secret to defeating the marrow thieves. That's it. So it's I'm definitely looking forward to reading this. Now, of course, I'm not going to read all of these, but I have one book that I'm reading right now that is not a fulfillment of any of the prompts, but after I'm finished that, I'm going to start selecting from this stack. This is Prime Meridian. This is a lovely novella written by Sylvia Moreno Garcia, who is Canadian and who is Latinx. The Mars of the movies and the imagination, an endless bastion of opportunities for a colonist with some guts. But she's trapped in Mexico City, enduring the drudgery of an unkind metropolis, working as a rent-a-friend, selling her blood to old folks with money who hope to rejuvenate themselves with it, enacting a fractured love story, and yet there's Mars at the edge of the silver screen of life. It awaits her. So this is Prime Meridian. And then the last book that I'm going to tell you about in this video is Black Writers Matter. And this is edited by the lovely Whitney French. And I did a very brief interview with Whitney French at the Word on the Street Festival, which I'll probably link it there or there. She's just lovely, so definitely follow her work. There's a lot of interesting things in store from her. So this is a collection of Black short stories. I believe that, yeah, it's not all fiction. Collected in these pages are the voices that need to be urgently heard, engaged and reckoned with. Black life, Black Canadian diasporic life in full color and full of desire is on offer in Black Writers Matter. It's an extraordinary achievement, a bold and loving gathering of Black writing in its sublimity. And so it's a collection of, I don't think there's any poetry, but I think there's at least one Afrofuturist work here. And, you know, collections are such a great opportunity for writers to write something short and to get it published. Ooh, so yeah, there's so Sapphire Woods wrote Becoming Poetry, Queer Blackness as the Full Absorption of Light. And then Makeda Silvera wrote Sister Vision, Black Women and Black Women of Color Press. There's writing by disabled authors here, queer authors. Yeah, authors from all around Canada. So this is definitely a collection if you would just like a nice sampling of Black writing from Canada. All right, that is it. So I hope that you enjoyed this video. I'm sure it's going to be very long, but it's an important topic. The Canadian readEHthon is a great opportunity for you to dip your toes into Canadian writing. Thank God it's for iPhones. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope that I've given you some examples of Canadian writing that you can explore and why it's important to learn more about Canada and Canada's literary history and present and futures. I do want to give a shout out to Sherry from Obsidian Texts and Tangents. This is a very brand spanking new YouTuber, booktuber. She uses pronouns she and they, and she launched her channel today. So I just have like a hope. I hope that she gets 1,000 subscribers in like 5 days. So please head on over to her channel and take a look at her booktube newbie tag. Shout out to her, and I hope that you have a absolutely wonderful day. See ya. Oh, remember to read with purpose. Bye.